Hello everyone, welcome back to another Top 10 Commander video. This time we're going to be talking about my top 10 cards in the Gruul colors. This is of course a Redux series, going through pretty much all of the colors, all of the color combinations, giving you my top 10s. I've done all of these before, but I've been around for a few years on YouTube, so we've been given a ton of cards since I did my last one. Now admittingly, Gruul is not my favorite color combination, but I still believe I have a good understanding of what works well in Commander. So number 10 here, we have a new card from Ikoria this year, Zalortha, Strength Incarnate. This was the card that kind of blew everybody's minds. How could we have a Godzilla creature in Magic the Gathering? Well, it's not really Godzilla. It's sort of a flavor thing that they decided to do for some reason. But the actual creature is Zalortha, Strength Incarnate, and lethal damage dealt to creatures you control is determined by power rather than their toughness, which I'm always a big fan of unique design. I think having a commander that pretty much rewards you for playing creatures with high power and low toughness is fantastic, because kind of like the Big Butts commander decks where it's nothing but creatures with high toughness and low power, you can play for pretty cheap mana a lot of creatures with high power that have really low, dangerously low toughness. And you are rewarded for that because the lethal damage to that creature is equal to the power. It's not going to be super powerful. I don't think it's something that is going to take Gruul to the next level, but very similar to Doran the Siege Tower, just fooling around with how you normally play the game, and something as simple as combat is always going to make the game more interesting. In number 9, we have Dragon Lord Atarka. Probably one of the better ETBs on any Gruul creature. Deals 5 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers your opponents control. Downside is that you can't just straight up do this to your opponents. Would make it pretty ridiculous, and some cards have been updated to include just any target, but since it does specify it can only be creature or planeswalker, you can really only choose either of those permanents. It is still powerful when you consider how much damage manipulation that we have in the game. We have cards that can double damage, we have cards that can triple damage, making something like this even more powerful if it's divided damage, because instead of just 5, you're pretty much getting 10 divided. This list was harder for me to do because Gruul doesn't have a lot of staples. It has a lot of good cards, but it doesn't have something that you're going to see in every deck. So for the cards that you're not expecting to see in every deck, I think Dragon Lord Atarka is far from the last creature you would want to play. Seriously, I mean, you can't go wrong. Number 8 is Xenagos, God of Revels. From here on out, you're probably going to see something closer to staples in Commander, but again, this is Gruul. Kind of like when Dimir, you had a lot of mill cards. You seem to have some very good specific Commander cards in Gruul, but not really flexible. Xenagos, God of Revels is actually a pretty flexible card. You could throw it into any decent creature deck. You're going to double the power and toughness of a creature and give it haste until end of turn. If you have any kind of Voltron commander, it's going to make it easier to deal commander damage. You could of course make a commander deck around Xenagos. Can't give the trigger to himself, but just make it nothing but infect. Very powerful. If you can only attack with one creature, might as well make it a pretty powerful creature kind of deck. And then number 7, we have Wart, the Raid Mother. Easily one of the most popular Gruul commanders, and I can't really blame people for why. She offers you something that's incredibly unique to the colors, and that is a spell slinger strategy when you're so used to smashing with big creatures. Giving all of your red and green instants and sorceries conspire pretty much means that if you have any kind of token strategy, you'll be able to copy whatever you play. If it's as simple as a ramp spell, it means you're going to get through the game a lot quicker. Same thing is true with draw spells, but the real appeal of this commander is that you can copy burn spells and win the game pretty easily. A little bit lower on the list because she is still incredibly narrow. I think Wart is really only powerful as a commander option, but if you consider that the commander option is still pretty dang powerful, I think she is still well deserving of being on this list. And then number 6, we have Decimate. Now we're talking about a card that could see play in several decks as opposed to a very narrow one. Decimate is just simply a removal spell. The downside is you do need to have legal targets or else you can't play it, but it hits 4 different permanent types. So if there's an artifact, enchantment, a creature, and a land, you're good to go, you can play it. That is still a pretty big downside though, because there are several situations where someone's missing an enchantment, or someone doesn't have an artifact, or even that someone doesn't have a creature and it's dead in your hand. I still think, however, if you can average 1 card removal per mana, you have a pretty good card. Number 5, we have Omnath, Locus of Rage. Very specific, but I still think it's flexible enough within the landfall strategy to where you could throw it into just about any deck that plays landfall, so long as you're also playing red. Also sees play in elemental decks for the same reason. You can just keep making more elementals every time you play a land, and it has a pretty powerful trigger for whenever an elemental dies, you pretty much get to lightning bolt something. So all around, I think a very versatile card. Some of the exploits are also pretty powerful, something like Rite of Replication. Just a pretty crazy card, and it sees play in a lot of Gruul decks. Number 4 is Xenagos the Reveler. Now we talked about Xenagod, here is Xenagos. For a while has been one of my favorite planeswalkers, and I think its plus is just ridiculously good. If we were to talk about the best value on a plus for a planeswalker, something that you can depend on every single turn, I mean, we've had good pluses before. We've had Elspeth, Sun's Champion. We've had some pretty crazy pluses like that, but this has the potential to not only pay for itself the first turn you put it out there, but net you even more mana. After that, you can just keep making more red and green mana, so if you do have something like a Wart the Raid Mother, usually a token Conspire deck, you will be able to feed a bunch of mana into your mana sinks, into your X-costed spells. Something that is pretty powerful in Commander is Insane Mana Generation. The other two abilities are kind of average. You can create a 2/2 Satyr, which could help out with the plus when you decide to do it later. Unintentional rhyming is fun. And the ult is rather weak, I'm not going to lie, it's not my favorite ult. It has potential to be powerful, you could get some pretty decent creatures, maybe help you go off, but it's far from a game-ending ult. I still think that the plus makes up for whatever weaknesses it might have as a planeswalker. And then number 3, we have Rhythm of the Wild. Now we're talking about a good quality staple you could throw into just about any creature deck that uses red and green. Not only can your opponents not counter your creatures, but non-token creatures you control have Riot, so when they enter the battlefield, they either get a +1/+1 counter or haste. Very versatile. I mean, we have cards that can give haste pretty easily. We have Fervor, but I mean, come on. If it's between Fervor or Rhythm of the Wild, you're going with Rhythm every single time. Your creature spells can't be countered, for crying out loud. You get insane versatility. If you have a +1/+1 counter deck, you can take advantage of Riot that way. Haste and not being countered, I mean, that's good for any creature deck. I don't really have to say much more. Number 2 is Hull Breach. Now, Hull Breach is a versatile removal spell, and one of the only true staples that I think exists in red and green. If you're looking to make just a red and green deck, you can destroy an artifact, or you can destroy an enchantment, or you can do both. You can destroy an artifact and an enchantment. This is different from Decimate because you have the option of destroying only one if only one is on the field. This is 2 mana sorcery speed, which is kind of the drawback for a lot of good Gruul cards, is that it's not really like a quick response as much as it is just dealing with a current problem on the board. Gruul tends to deal with things through combat, not really worrying about whatever they might have, typically just depending on overpowering your opponents with powerful creatures. So something like Hull Breach does offer you that rare quality removal, and I think it's spectacular. I mean, we do have the Conspire mechanic with Wart, so any kind of instant and sorcery that's even halfway decent, you're going to be able to take advantage of that anyway. You can copy this, you get even more removal, and it follows that same rule that I have with Decimate, and it's even more flexible. If you can deal with a permanent for a single mana, on average, that's going to be worth a ton in Commander. So before I go on to number 1, I want to talk about some honorable mentions here. We have a ton of those Domri Planeswalkers, and I think some of them are decent. But my problem with Planeswalkers, it's not really a Gruul thing, it's just that they all seem to blend in with each other. Not even so much that there's a ton of Planeswalkers with the same name, but their abilities aren't really worth talking about. We do have Wrenn and 6, which is a big deal, I guess, in Modern, but I haven't really seen it yet in Commander, so I can't really judge it. We have some other popular Commander options like Roshin Manderer, Rurik Thar the Unbowed. We have Ulash the Hate Seed. This is kind of what I was talking about earlier when I said there's a lot of really good specific Commander options, like a lot of good cards that are just good in one strategy, but they don't really see play in other decks. So it was kind of harder to do a top 10 because you just have all these different directions. So number 1, we have Vexing Shusher. I still think what we have here is incredibly unique. I've always thought this card was powerful. Vexing Shusher can't be countered. You have the awesome hybrid red-green mana on the ability, so it's super flexible. You just pay that 1 mana and target spell can't be countered. So pretty much just in response to something, you can just make a spell uncounterable, which makes it very difficult for your opponents to deal with your deck. Something like this just pretty much makes it a lot easier to play Gruul, making your spells uncounterable. Rhythm of the Wild was pretty powerful for that reason, but Vexing Shusher pretty much allows you to do it for whatever card you play, making Vexing Shusher just one of the more powerful cards in Commander. But anyway, you all have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next time.